Is this? I believe this is on. Well, welcome to the Driving Efficiency in Operations session. We'll ask that everybody mute their phones and do all that good stuff so the session's not interrupted. This is the first session in the cost-cutting track of Excellence in Government 2013. Just a few words before we get started. Just turn volume up. I'm Derek Morera with Censeo Consulting Group, the underwriter for this session. Censeo Consulting Group is a firm that specializes in operations, procurement, supply chain, really driving rapid improvements to do the things that we're talking about today. Efficiency around operations, efficient cost reduction. And this session today is really focused on the challenges that every agency is facing right now. Budgetary pressures, as we were just talking up here amongst the panelists, is being forced on every agency. So the good news from the work that we've done in the past 10 years is that low-hanging fruit, opportunities to drive quick cost reductions, or to what we were just talking about, the meat cleaver approach of getting costs out of the system, those opportunities do exist. They are out there. Savings can be realized in months rather than years. The challenge, though, is making these savings sustainable. Making them impactful and meaningful over the long term is a significant challenge. So when we talk about driving efficiency in operations, this panel here today is going to talk about their perspectives, their experiences based on real-world examples of trying to take costs out of their agencies, about trying to actually change these embedded processes, organizational models that have been in place for, as we know, a very long time. They've been embedded. They've been resilient to past change efforts that have sought to drive cost reductions. But in this case, there really is no opportunity to back down and say, well, this is too hard because costs are coming out of the system. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Dana Grinshpan, who is the moderator for today's session. Dana.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Welcome, everyone, today, bright and early. I hope you had an opportunity to check out Cass Sunstein. He was wonderful. It's a tough act to follow. So I'm happy to welcome you here. My name is Dana Grinshpan. I'm the research manager with the Government Business Council. We are the research division of the Government Executive magazine. And not too long ago, we actually did a very large report on cutting costs and operational efficiency in the federal government. And I'm happy to say that many of the experts that we spoke to in that study are here with us today, so thank you for joining us. And in doing so, I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversation. So with that, I'd like to say that we have a 50-minute session today. I'd like to take the first 25 minutes to have some introductions, talk about some things that are happening at their agencies, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. So please feel free to write down some questions, and we'll be happy to take them. So with that, I'd like to introduce my distinguished panel today. Starting at the far, this is Tom Terwilliger. He is the Chief Learning Officer at the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC. And then we also have Rhea, the Assistant Secretary of Department of Interior, who leads management, policy, and budget. And last but certainly not least, we have Peggy Sherry, who is the Chief Financial Officer at Department of Homeland Security. So thank you again for coming. I'd love to just kick things off by some introductions. If Tom, do you want to start and introduce yourself and some of the efficiency programs that you're working on at your agency?
Sure. Thank you. Yes, I'm Tom Terwilliger, and the FDIC, first I want to say your money is safe in the institution, so we're very proud of our track record with that. As you know, the FDIC has just gone through the largest crisis since the founding 80 years ago in 1933. And as we went through that, most of the money that we use has got to be focused on the crisis and resolving failed institutions. All of the money we make and you spend, it comes from industry. None of it comes from the federal government. So we have some unique opportunities as well as unique challenges with that. I think two things that I really want to point out in terms of how do you think about operating in a constrained environment, whether it's a crisis or whether it's some other environment, is that you have to focus on what's important to the organization. So in 2007, our viewpoint survey results said that we weren't a very engaged workforce. So we decided as an organization that we needed to do something about that. And then the crisis hit in about 2008, and as we looked at the budget requirements for the corporation, the chairman was very clear in saying we're going to focus on our core business needs and focus on resolving failed institutions, and we're going to focus on the leadership development that's necessary to change our organization. By 2010, we were the #2 best place to work. For the last 2 years, the FDIC was rated the #1 best place to work in the federal government. And we attribute that to the entire organization saying we're going to change how we do things. We're going to look at our processes. We're going to look at how can we engage our employees in a way that best uses the organization. Tied and along with that, we implemented a leadership development program that transformed how we train our leaders for our organization. For example, in 2007, only 128 people went through leadership programs in the corporation, and at that time, our size was about 4,200 employees. In the height of the crisis, we topped out just under 9,000 employees. And since 2008, more than 3,000 leaders have gone through the leadership development programs in our organization. So a huge increase in how we train our leaders. We also added 2 additional courses to make it 5 core courses for leaders with initial course for one-on-one, our newest employees, and then our executives, because we want our executives to be strategic leaders, and we didn't really tell them what that meant for us. So we needed to fix and improve that. So by transforming the leadership program and by looking at how can we change the culture from across the organization, we were really successful in thinking about how we might do that. And the other thing I want to talk about is how do you think about looking at developing your organization for the longer-term future. So we have a corporate employee program where our business line employees start out, and for the first year, they fall under corporate university, the organization, the training arm of the FDIC. And they go through an acculturation stage where they go through every single business line and understand what does every business line do before they go on the track for their own commissioning program. And we found that to be extremely successful in both retention and in the engagement of our employees. And for example, for the last 7 years, our attrition rate for our newest employees has been about 17% over that entire 7-year period. We know some of our peers organizations, for new folks coming into that world, they run about 30% per year. And then for the last 3 years, it's been under 2% loss for those newest employees. So we think we're doing a lot of things smarter in how we changed our organization to be responsive to the future and strategic needs of our corporation.
Good morning, everybody. So again, I work at the Department of the Interior, and just to give you a little bit of background on that department, if you don't already know it, we manage about 1 out of every 5 acres of the United States on behalf of the American taxpayer. Roughly 30% of the nation's water supply, 30% of the nation's energy supply. We manage the trust relationships and responsibilities to all of the federally recognized tribes, the Native American tribes and the Alaska Native tribes. It's almost 600 tribes throughout the country. And we also manage things like the National Park Service and endangered species across the country through the Fish and Wildlife Service. So we have a very broad, diverse, gargantuan mission at the Department of Interior. And when we think about opportunities for efficiency, we run straight into, I think, the challenge that many large government agencies have, which is a challenge around decentralization. We are one of the oldest cabinet agencies in the federal government. We kind of grew up with the country, and we got a lot of our assets through kind of the historical episodes of this country's development. And when you look at kind of where things are at in terms of our business processes, our management strategies, I often like to joke that many of them are as antiquated as the 1872 Mining Act in terms of how we think about operational efficiencies. And so let me give you one example that I think I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about today, which is IT. So when I first joined the Department of Interior in 2009, we realized, actually, in the first week of then Secretary Salazar's term, that he was actually unable to email all employees from his desk. He actually didn't even have a computer at his desk, so that was the first problem. But once we got him a computer, we realized, boy, you can't actually just hit a button and send it out to all of your employees. And granted, we have 70,000 employees across the country, but it is 2009, and internet is mostly readily available throughout the country. And so the question was, well, why? Well, we quickly determined that there were 14 different email systems that existed throughout the Department of Interior, which was a little bit curious given the fact that we only have 8 bureaus. So I still have never really been able to figure out why we had 14 different email systems. But in addition to 14 different email systems, we had about 20 CIOs scattered around the department at various levels in the organization, with a lot of duplication, a lot of redundancy, and a lot of systems that basically just weren't talking to each other. So one of the things that we've embarked on at the Department of Interior is really looking at the opportunity to drive efficiency through IT. But let me leave you with this one thought. We went into that exercise not simply, and actually not most importantly, as how do we drive costs out of the system? That was not the fundamental question. We went into that exercise asking, how do we get better service to our employees and to the American taxpayer? I mean, our employees were actually complaining because they couldn't email each other. They were using antiquated systems that, again, were managed together by straw and bale wire. And they were really saying, wait, I go home and I'm able to, get on a broadband Wi-Fi and do all this stuff at home, and I go to work and I don't have nearly the same access to these types of technologies. What's wrong with that? So as the senior leadership team really thinking about this question, I think it's important to underscore that the opportunities, I believe, for the greatest cost efficiencies, the greatest management efficiencies around the federal government are the same opportunities for increasing mission support, increasing focus to mission throughout these agencies. And I'd just like to leave that thought with you, and we'll probably come back to it later in the conversation.
Good morning, everyone. Very glad to be here. I think events like this are just so very critical in these challenging times. I mean, I think it's probably one of the most challenging times to be a CFO in the federal government, but it's also one of the times where it really shows you that your training it really matters, and it makes it very important for you to be able to share strategies with your colleagues and to share strategies with you all on ways to become more efficient in operations. And I think what you just described as far as the IT is probably what most agencies could probably describe. Probably most of the large agencies could describe. Certainly, those were the exact same challenges that we had when the Secretary joined us in 2009 in Homeland Security. My role is I've been with DHS since mid-2007, and so I've seen an awful lot of great changes there. It was the deputy CFO before becoming the CFO, so I've really had an opportunity to really touch an awful lot of financial management and performance-related issues within the department. But what I really see my role is really a champion of operational efficiencies, as well as an integrator across the lines of business. Because as the CFO, you pretty much touch all lines of business, and you see all operations, whether or not they're mission support, business support, or whether actually they're mission. So you really have an opportunity and a responsibility to be able to look for ways to be able to integrate as well as to drive efficiencies. DHS was put together, as you know, back in 2003. It was pulled together from 22 different entities, and they brought with them really their independent cultures, their independent systems, their independent issues, and it's been very, very difficult, I think, to be able to try to pull that together as one DHS. So certainly lots of opportunities to streamline operations. When the Secretary joined DHS in 2009, one of the very first things that she started to do was something called an efficiency review initiative. This was something that she had done as a governor when she was back in Arizona, when you were required to balance budgets, and when they were clearly having, and still are having, where they're having issues as it relates to budgets. Was a little bit difficult in DHS at the time because we had been very, very fortunate with congressional funding. Basically, we had budgets that grew probably 70% up to that point from the time that we were actually pulled together back in 2003. So not a whole lot of appetite for fiscal discipline, not a whole lot of appetite for really looking at operational efficiencies. So she had that facing her when she came in and really enlisted really many of the lines of business chiefs to be able to champion those initiatives. services. We went from what was really a top-down driven initiative to one today that is really employee-driven. So that's really critical, I think, as well. Identifying those opportunities, and clearly IT and consolidation are ones that DHS is going after big time. Really lots of opportunities there. But also to be able to employ with that the employee-driven ideas, because really it's the people who are either on the front line who are actually working in the back office rooms that really have those good ideas. So we pull together executive steering committees where people actually share ideas, ways to be able to do it. And it's not just at a headquarters level, but each of our individual components are represented there as well. So really gives us lots of opportunities to be able to identify areas, such as HRIT is a huge area that we have lots of back office legacy HR systems, really looking for opportunities to be able to pull them together. And the other area would be moving towards shared services. What we're really looking to do is to be able to do less of the capital expenditures and looking for where it makes sense. And in a lot of the business systems, it does make sense. Where are those things that you could really have more of an operating expense? You could purchase it as a service, develop strong service level agreements, and then really ultimately reduce the overall O&M in the future. We're also looking very much at mission systems as well. So, for instance, when we pulled together all the different agencies into DHS, we had very many different ways to be able to vet people's names, their biography, their backgrounds, different systems. And what we've been really doing is trying to look to ways to be able to consolidate them so that we can actually reduce our overall costs, but also hopefully increase our overall risk profile as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And I have to say, you're making my job pretty easy today, because one question that I've really been facing in my work at the Government Business Council is about IT efficiency. And there's a lot of talk right now about the technologies that enable IT efficiency, i.e. the cloud, big data, mobility. What have your experiences been, and I'd really appreciate insight from all of you if you could, with, making your IT technologies more updated, more efficient? Are they always, how do you make sure that you maximize that return on investment?
I'll start.
Okay.
So one of the areas that we've been working on is really the consolidation of our data centers. We've currently consolidated about 12 into 2 data centers, and we still have about 34 more to go through probably through around 2015. We're hoping that we'll be able to have done that. Really, so in a sense, what we're doing is we're taking those capital expenditures that are being done in each of the different components, and we're consolidating them somewhat into our own personal cloud, the DHS cloud. And we would expect to be able to see between $2 to $3 billion worth of savings overall, kind of as a return on investment. So it's very critical, I think, number one, for you to be able to identify those opportunities, such as the consolidation of the data centers. But then also, I think one of the roles that the CFO has is really to be able to identify what is that ROI. One of the challenges that you have in the federal government is you have to sometimes spend money in order to be able to save money. And since we are, we do operate at the Congress basically will appropriate the funding for us. Sometimes the business plan that you had initially to be able to save money, sometimes as you lengthen out your time horizon, sometimes you start to lose a little bit of that ROI. So again, as a champion of operational efficiencies, it's important for us to be able to take those really good ideas and to be able to make sure that you're able to articulate them to our stakeholders, such as Congress.
Wonderful.
So at the Department of Interior, back to the email example, we consolidated all of the systems into a cloud for service system. So we basically awarded a contract to Google Apps, which enabled us not only to get to a single email system for the first time in the history of the department, but also enabled us to take advantage of the kind of extras that we get with the Google Apps process. Mm-hmm. So these are opportunities to increase collaborations, whether it's through the simple kind of chat buttons that are included in kind of the screenshots that you are probably familiar with Google, or beyond that, the Google Hangout or the Google Plus activities that if you have video conferencing capabilities, just basically a camera on your laptop, you're going to be able to video conference with a colleague as opposed to having to fly, which is considerable for a department like ours, where we're scattered in over 2,400 locations all across the country. And with travel budgets the way they are in the federal government, it's enormously important for us to try to figure out how to increase things like video teleconferencing. And again, based on just the technology that we had prior to, I think, this both reinvestment and reinvigoration of our IT systems, those opportunities were really limited. So we're seeing, I think, a multiplicity of benefits out of, again, an effort to really drive consistency, drive improvement, and drive efficiency. And so you see that within our opportunities in software for a service, but also as we look towards larger, I believe, cost savings opportunities in data centers in particular. Really looking at infrastructure as a service is, I think, a big, profound opportunity for all federal agencies. Department of Interior, again, had many examples, we still do, of data centers that are really just not being used anywhere near best business practices minimums, right? So we have data centers that sometimes are located in closets, in different office stations, different parks, different refuges all around the country. They're being utilized at something around 15 to 20% utilization rate. Why do we need those data centers, right? We just do not need those data centers. They cost a lot of money. They increase our real estate costs because of the energy usage that they require. And so really thinking en masse about the big opportunities to not only move these things to the cloud to save money, but to increase our reliability. Because in many cases, particularly the data systems that help, for example, the U.S. Geological Survey, this is the agency that really monitors minute by minute earthquake and volcano, other natural hazards and disasters. Those things are very complicated equipment that needs to be protected in a way that we're asking ourselves, could we increase, again, our reliability? Could we increase the integrity of this data by actually moving it to the cloud and saving 50%? That's a good question to be asking ourselves, and I think that's a question that many other federal agencies are asking themselves today.
So I'll answer it taking a little bit different stance. We are doing some similar things to what my colleagues are doing in terms of looking at efficiencies and so forth. I think the three things I want to kind of focus on would be, first, it's about leadership at the end of the day. Our CIO changed 3 years ago, and a more forward-looking CIO helped us move forward using mobile technology and some other ways to process information a lot smarter. The other one is, under the corporate employee programs I mentioned earlier, our business line employees are coming in through corporate university and their acculturation stage. And this program, we primarily hire recent college graduates. So the average age of our newer employees is much younger than it was in the past. So in 2007, for example, we had about 117 of these employees that were future business line employees. Today, we have more than 1,500, or a full third of our examiners in the workforce are this net gen employee. So if you let the employees drive some of that too, that kind of helps. We're getting ready to move to the bring your own device scenario in FDIC, because we know that they have them, they don't want to, and so how can we leverage that and be smart about it? So I think that's one thing. And then the last thing I want to talk about is how you integrate, or how you start with a new IT system. And in the FDIC in the past, the training for that was done by IT. And it was kind of done sometimes and hit some people, or not all the people, or whatever. So now when we do a new system, corporate university is responsible for the training and development that's tied to launching a new system, so that people are able to leverage the new system from the beginning and not over time learn that it has functionality that you didn't realize it had.
Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate that. And we're just at the 25-minute mark, and I want to open up our opportunity for questions from you. This is a great chance to really ask a wide breadth of panelists here different things about how to create efficiency, cutting costs at your agency. So please, we have someone going around the room with a mic who will be happy to take your questions. We have some questions over here in the front.
With all the talk with the transformation in new IT. My experience has been by the time we get the funding, after the plans, and we get it implemented, it's already antiquated. And it's very frustrating. So have you found that to be still true with now the new transformations that you're doing in the IT area? And what have you done to kind of like combat that?
I think that's exactly right. And I think one of the ways that we're trying to do it is to really look at shared services or to be able to purchase things in the cloud. So rather than taking, 10 years, $10 billion later, that you've developed infrastructure that's already antiquated, to be able to purchase your services as a shared service provider. And not everything's going to lend itself to that. I think that there's probably some mission IT that we're still going to need to be building ourselves. But things such as accounting systems, you know what I mean? There are absolutely accounting systems out there where they're actually able to go ahead and to do the upgrades when they need to do them. But again, it'll be critical to make sure that you continue to have that innovation out there, because one of the benefits of going to a shared service provider is you're purchasing as a service. You're making sure that you've got your service level agreements tight to be able to get what you need to be able to have mission delivery. But you also then have that provider providing, doing the upgrades, doing the innovations, so that we make sure that at the end of the day, IT, after you spend all your money, IT isn't already obsolete.
And please feel free to offer your name and your agency if it's applicable.
Yes, this is April Wicks, U.S. Courts. Tom mentioned about bring your own device to work, and I was wondering if the other agencies were also doing that to drive efficiency, but then also how is that impacting, like, from a security perspective?
I think you hit
Yes, so we are doing that. It's taken us a little while because I think you hit on the exact thing with security, all right, to be able to make sure that you've got tight security out there. So for instance, the Border Patrol agents having tactical communications or whatever, what they've been trying to do is to be able to consolidate them down. Again, that's not your typical iPad or your iPhone type of thing, but to be able to consolidate the number of pieces of equipment that they need in order to be able to have good, strong communications. But the piece that tends to sometimes slow that down a little bit is to make sure that you've got the security right. So yes, we are absolutely moving in that direction.
We have one in the back here.
Morning. As an industrial engineer, I can measure efficiency with widgets to the infinite degree. Okay? How do you measure efficiency with tasks that aren't easily as quantifiable? In other words, just because I went from 1 to 2 doesn't mean I did a good job, because I should have been doing 10. So how do you find it? How do you measure efficiency with tasks that aren't so identifiable and quantifiable?
So I think this question gets to my earlier point about how we come to the ideas around efficiency, and I think. Again, I found in my experience that the biggest opportunities are really the opportunities that aren't purely defined by efficiency, but are driven by mission outcomes. Mm-hmm. And so, the opportunities to measure a variety of different mission outcomes are varied. Are they qualitative or quantitative? Is it an analytical process, or is it more of a qualitative process? I can say in the Department of Interior, it's a combination of both, right? We both measure how many people come to national parks every year, but we also measure their satisfaction levels with those national parks and their experience in those national parks, right? So it's a balance of, again, both those quantitative and qualitative measures that ultimately, I think, end us up into a place of, are we doing a good job? Do we feel secure in how we're delivering these mission services to the American public? And I don't think those things can ever fully be defined by just the easily, again, I think more quantitative metrics, but certainly by the qualitative. And the one other thing that I will throw out here, because I think it's incredibly important, if not the most important ingredient to all of these efficiency measures around the federal government, and that's our federal employee themselves, right? That measuring their satisfaction with their jobs. And there's a variety of different tools to measure that. Some agencies have their own tools. We have the broader Federal Human Capital Viewpoint Survey that comes out every other year, and then there's kind of in-between years of measurement that happens. It's really important to understand where employees are coming from. And I have to say, just last week, I think it was, I was talking to some consultants that were coming in. They were talking about cost savings measures that they were interested in working with us on. And they kept on using this term of, how do we get your employees to do more with less? And you hear that a lot these days because of the overall fiscal climate that we're in, sequestration, et cetera. And I can tell you right now, I am not going to have a conversation with my employees about doing more with less. I'm just not. Because you know what? They have been doing more with less. They've been doing more with less for a really, really long time. The Department of Interior, has had pretty much at level budgets for the last 10 years, went down significantly about a decade ago. We've been rebuilding it up slowly. But, this is an agency, this is a group of bureaus that have already been cut to the bone, right? So when we go out there and we say, well, you just got to do more with less, they really don't want to hear that. It is about how can we enable you to do your job better and take away some stuff, take away some of the noise, right. Take away some of the bureaucracy, make things more streamlined to enable you to be more effective at your job. Right? I think that is the core question, that is the core opportunity that is before us. But it is vested, it is embedded in the individual employee and connecting with the individual employee to try to determine what makes the most sense for the organization.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that it's hard to, I think you're right. The question is hard because it's easy to measure some things and hard to measure lots of other things. Within the FDIC, we're trying to integrate as many measurements as possible and looking at as many leading practices to figure out how do others do what you do, remembering that you have to adjust to your own organization. I'm afraid that so many people try to use leading practices by copying what somebody does, and that's never usually going to work. But I think that your point about getting the employee involved and getting every employee focused on creativity and innovation, efficiency is kind of one of those things that you know when you see it. You don't always measure it necessarily. And so I would encourage you to take the model that the president of Young Brands of the conference, he said this. I asked my people to take out a piece of paper and write down, if you went on to a new opportunity or retired or all those things that people transfer from one job to another, and we hired a hot shot behind you because you're already obviously a highly talented employee, and you wrote on a piece of paper, what would that hot shot do when they came into your job? What's the first thing they would do? And then turn the paper over and say, so why aren't you doing it? It's about being innovative and creative, about thinking at your own opportunities that you have and figuring out how do I change my organization, knowing what efficiency really does look like.
And I just wanted to add on to that, because I do think the key of what both of you have hit on is really employee engagement. Because initially when I talked about the Secretary's efficiency reviews, it was really kind of top driven down. And you didn't quite have the level of buy-in and necessarily the ability to be able to do that innovation and to talk about how do you actually measure performance, because that's really what it's about. Oftentimes when we talk about efficiencies, we really mean budget cuts. And I think that you've become more efficient because you've dropped down by $1 billion from 10 years ago or whatever. But the reality is you really haven't. You've been making you've been making choices, but they have not necessarily been strategic choices. So I think the ability to be able to understand that you've got targets that you need to hit, there are things that you need to do, and to be able to pull together the people who actually do them, to be able to talk about what are ways to be able to still do your job. That's the key. If you just do budget cuts, you may not be able to ultimately become more efficient. But how are you still able to do your job, but recognizing that you're just going to have to do it differently, or you're going to just simply have to stop doing some things? Really being honest with employees, talking to them about that really gives them the freedom then to be able to enter into the conversation, to be able to say, how are you going to be able to do things differently? And this is where I know we will be when we get there, rather than just doing across the board budget cuts.
I think we have some in the front here.
Good morning. I'm Bob Tobias from American University, and I'd like to build on the discussion from the last question. The Best Places to Work analysis shows that over 95% of employees think the work that they do is important, and yet around 30% feel they're not empowered. So my question is, how specifically and systemically would you carry out this idea of including and involving employees on a regular basis? It's easy to say people ought to be more creative, they ought to be more innovative, and as they sit having coffee with each other, they have great ideas that they suggest to each other. But the question is, how does an organization like DHS or DOI or even FDIC, smaller, go about systemically creating processes to capture the ideas and implement them? Because my belief is, if you're able to do that, that 35% or whatever it is who feel, or 65% who do not feel empowered are going to respond to that kind of an approach by feeling more empowered and give you more and achieve the engagement you suggest.
So let me start off. One of the big areas that we have identified moving forward as opportunities for management efficiencies relates to the nature of what we look like in the field. So the Department of Interior, I was telling Dana earlier, has more stuff than any other federal agency with the exception of the Department of Defense. We have not only office buildings and fleets, we also have things like the St. Louis Arch and the Statue of Liberty. And so in thinking about how we manage all these assets more rationally across the country, we've decided to try to pursue something that was really developed in the field. It was actually developed in a field office in southern Colorado in a collaboration between one of our agencies, the Bureau of Land Management, and actually the Forest Service at USDA, where in this small town in Colorado, there was literally a Forest Service office a block away from this BLM office, and a lot of times people going in there for timber permits or ranching permits or backcountry hiking permits would go to the wrong place, right? They just, most people don't really understand the differences between the different land management agencies, and they'd go into the wrong place, and they ended up kind of doing a lot of redundant services. And the two people that actually led those organizations sat down at lunch one day and said, you know what, does it make sense for us to have two visitor centers? Does it make sense for us to be a block away from each other and to have these two buildings? Why don't we consolidate and figure out the opportunities not only to create efficiencies, but to provide a better, more forward-facing kind of front to the American public, right? That initiative became something called Service First at the Department of Interior, an opportunity for field locations, really, for them to identify opportunities to increase efficiencies by improving collaborations across their sister agencies. We are looking at that concept and trying to bring that concept to scale. But make no mistake about it, that concept is rooted in the creativity and the innovation of people at the field level. Right, so this is not about folks at my level bringing in fancy consultants to tell everybody this is what you have to do. This is about us saying, okay, we're going to create an organizational process to try to get the best ideas that are out there from the field level. What's happened, what's not happened. What can we do to try to increase those opportunities for creative solutions at the field level? And when we see those creative opportunities at the field level, what can we do to bring them to scale? Right, so I think all of this is to say, we do believe that our employees are our best assets by far. And when you look at the employees that work for the Department of Interior, these are people that, they grow up wanting to be Park Service Rangers, right? They really, really care about the missions. And how do we unleash, right, that depth of passion and commitment to their jobs in helping us solve, I think, some of the greatest challenges that we're facing today?
That's something kind of what we did in the FDIC when we went through our culture change initiative, which was what we called it up until a year and a half ago, was a grassroots employee-based process. We have 88 field offices across the country, and we had representation across the diverse parts of our organization, employee-based, with representative across the spectrum of the entire organization, recognizing that managers and leaders are also employees. And then we had opened up as many communication ways to help employees have a voice. Whenever we publish any new publication, it goes out for employee comment for a period of time. Whenever we do any new major policies, it goes out for employee comments so they can be engaged with that. Anything to do with diversity and inclusion, we have regional offices, regional committees that meet on their own. They roll that up to the executive, we call it executive CDAC, where the division office directors sit to hear what employees have to say, and their employees are the ones presenting it to us. So we hear from them, what their intent is with their questions and so forth. So we opened a lot of avenues for employees to be engaged and to have conversations with the senior leadership of the organization.
And I think that's right. I mean, I think that's the same sort of thing that you have at DHS. And clearly, you have a very large organization that's all over the country, has an international footprint. It's a little bit difficult to do that. So you have to hit it on several different levels. I think I talked a little bit about the efficiency review, where the secretary really does champion it. She is the champion, and what she does is she looks to each of the components to almost become a champion of a particular initiative. And so they really are then given the freedom as well as the responsibility to go out there and look for various ways to be able to identify efficiencies. But I also think that it needs to be seen as a sustainable process. It can't be just a 1 or 2 time thing, and it can't just be seen as a budget cut. So it really needs to be, the employees need to be empowered. They need to really be able to be told that their ideas are valued. And one of the things that the secretary does is she'll give, like somewhat similar to the SAVE Award. She'll prominently feature it on the website. She'll go out and she'll visit people. She'll have phone calls with employees who have participated. And this is really something that we do all year long, not just once or twice a year or early on in an administration. Just really trying to put it into the culture and really reward employees with the freedom to be able to identify those areas where we can make a difference.
Hey, thank you. And I actually wanted to just ask one question, and we have only a few minutes left. But in thinking about tools and ideas that our audience can take away with regard to creating efficiency at their agency, there's a lot of talk in government right now, and have been for several years, about change management. And it's kind of this buzzword, and it's hard to put your finger on what it is and how it's applicable. But change is really, it can offer opportunities for efficiency, but it can also create opportunities for inefficiency. And I feel each of you have had experience in transitions and changes at your agency. Are there any things that you would offer to our audience as principles that you live by or ideas that you've learned that have been really successful?
I'll speak for the FDIC in terms of what we do. We have a number of things that have changed as we got through the crisis and as we transformed the leadership development for all of our employees. Within the FDIC, we use the Cotter model in terms of thinking about how to do changes, and 8 steps that really make good sense and everybody can kind of grab onto and understand. But I think the main thing about having change management is what we talked about in the last conversation, and that is the employees have to be engaged in it and have to want to be ready to change the organization. And some won't, and that's okay, because they'll get dragged along by the mass who will. And that's what we've seen in the FDIC is we've changed a number of different things. And I'll take the CEP program as that one example. Before the CEP program went through each part of the business line for new employees, they were hired by the field office, and they went into that field office, and they were trained, and they were commissioned in that one office with that one perspective about the FDIC. And they went kicking and screaming. There was a lot of kicking and screaming because they didn't want to give up their people for this rotational period for a year where they're outside of the field office looking at the different parts of the business lines. And it's about leadership, and it's about the organization saying, we're going to do this. We're going to figure out how to make it work, and we had the right person in the job at the right time so that the foundation was solid. Because I think what Peggy said is exactly right. You got to do things that are sustainable. Otherwise, employees will wait out until that change is over. And now it's been almost 10 years, and we're really pleased that it's stuck, and the employees are far more engaged. They're doing a lot better for us as employees, and so we're seeing it work. It's just having the tenacity to get it done.
So let me tell you a very quick story about an organization that used to be a part of something called the Minerals Management Service. So as many of you all remember, we had a major oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 2011. And the agency that was responsible for managing offshore oil and gas leases for the Department of Interior and for the country was an agency called the Minerals Management Service. The oil is spilling in the Gulf. We can't figure out how to turn it off. There's huge political controversy around this agency and questions around conflicts of interest and appropriateness as it relates to inspections and enforcement. And so long and the short of it is that we broke that agency up into three separate components, three separate organizations. I want to talk a little bit about about one of those organizations. So the organization that I actually ended up inheriting responsibility for is an organization now called the Office of Natural Resource Revenue. Probably most of you don't know about this office, but it collects on average $13 billion for the American taxpayer. It's the largest source of revenue outside of the IRS. And this is all from royalties, receipts, fees from oil and gas leasing throughout the country. This office in particular had already gone through a scandal. So earlier on, in the beginning of 2009, it was discovered that there was a small group of employees that had really done illegal actions, basically fraternizing with industry, partying with drugs and with prostitutes. I mean, it just could not get worse than this, right? Really bad examples. Again, a very small group of employees. Fast forward however many months later, then they're also on the front pages once again with an oil spill. And when it was decided that I would take over this particular agency, I flew out to Denver, which is where most of the employees are based, and I had an all-employee meeting with them, and it was a really tough crowd. I would say there were a group of people in the back that basically took their chairs and just turned away. The rest of the people in the audience were all sitting like this. Right? Because they were expecting me to come in and to say, you got to get your act together and this is how you're going to do it. I didn't do that, actually. I went in there and said, we're facing a really tough situation, and I know you guys feel bad. I can't imagine how bad you feel. But this fundamentally is your organization, and we together are going to figure out what you want your organization to look like, so that we can reclaim the credibility that you deserve for the American public. And what we began that day was not even a 12-month, it was a 9-month exercise to do a quick strategic review. It wasn't a big strategic plan, it wasn't a whole new organizational chart. It was basically saying, what can we do to both increase the credibility that we need to have for the American taxpayer, but what can we do to improve the things that we know need improving? And we picked 5 things, right? Not 12 things, not 20 things, 5 things to focus on to try to, again, improve both of those things, but also improve employee morale fundamentally. And these things were all driven by teams of employees within the organization. They were not driven by me. They were not driven by any other kind of sets of senior leaderships from Washington, D.C. These were employee-driven efforts. And I mean, it's a long story, but let me cut to the chase. 12 months after the end of the oil spill, this organization was named the best place to work in the city of Denver, Colorado, by the Rocky Mountain News, which is the state's second largest paper. And it was an outside, right? I mean, this was an incredible accolade for employees that basically said, you know what, I'm going to stand up for myself and my own organization, and I'm going to make this organization an organization that I'm proud of working for. And so again, it's unleashing the power that I think exists within our employees and to ask them to help be the leaders for the changes that we need.
And the only thing I'll add is coming from a fairly technical profession, we tend to not really focus a lot on some of the softer skills. But one of the things that I've learned over my years in the leadership position is really change management is really undervalued. I mean, it's really kind of the secret weapon to be able to get anything done. Whether it's making a large reorganization or even a small reorganization, rolling out new leadership programs, rolling out accounting systems or different IT systems. systems. I mean, if you do not focus on change management, then I can almost tell you it will either be a spectacular failure or it's going to be much more costly. And at the end of the day, the stakeholders who are actually the ones who are the instruments of change will only reluctantly come to the table unless you involve them up front. So again, I think it's kind of one of the secret weapons, one that maybe we don't necessarily focus a whole lot on in the federal government, but certainly I know whenever I'm looking at any new venture, any large task, basically one of the first things we talk about is our stakeholders, change management, communication plans. How do you ultimately roll things out? Really looking at some of those things up front, I think, is really a secret to success.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Who would have thought 50 minutes isn't enough? At least it wasn't for me. So can we give them a round of applause? Thank you. Thank you. And I hope you visit some of the other sessions. We've got a great plan for you today.